Hey, I'm Tuomas Tähtinen. This is Jesse Lindgren of Turku Historical Fencing Society, and we'll be demonstrating some variations of a simple drill, how to use it to take you all the way from first stages of learning new technique, all the way to applying those techniques in sparring. And first of all, in any kind of bird drill like this, one person is the coach and the other person is the student. And the student's job is to apply correct technique when the opportunity arises. The coach's job is to provide these opportunities and to make sure the student performs the techniques well. For the most part in this video, I'll be playing the role of the coach and Jesse will be playing the student. And at all times, the coach tries to squeeze better performance out of the student by giving limited, simple advice and of course hitting the student when they fail. The rate of success should be calibrated by the coach to be somewhere between 50 and 90% in any and all non-competitive forms of the drill. The first simplest version of this drill is static, choreographed with only one possible action performed by the student. The student knows which one it is. And the student performs it as the coach gives the signal. We always begin from a similar setup with a neutral crossing, with the crossing directly between us, with our hands on hilts slightly on our left side and our points a bit up and to our right. And from here, there should be slight pressure on the swords in this neutral crossing. And the first technique is, as I press to the side, the student raises their sword up and strikes around to the arm or the head and then retreats under cover. Let's do that again. And the second technique is, if my sword drifts to the right so that the center line becomes clear, the student thrusts straight in. And again. A few technical details about the first technique. First of all, the student's sword shouldn't take any longer a path around my sword than is absolutely necessary. So as I press to the side, their sword goes straight up and straight down. But it does not go in a wide movement around, because if it does, I can parry and riposte it. Also, the student should have a strong, solid structure behind their strike, so that they close the central line and then can actually cleave my arm off and do whatever they want afterwards. And as always, the student should either close into grapple after they're struck, or they should retreat under cover. And a few technical details about the second technique. First of all, when the opportunity arises, the student's sword should again move on the shortest possible path, so it's as if their point was being drawn directly to the target. Right. There should be no needlessly wide movement around, because if there is, I can just parry and riposte it. And as always, the student should, after they have struck their thrust, either close into grapple or retreat under cover. Now, once the student can more or less perform the techniques, the gross motor movements of the techniques in the simplest drill setting, we can create an option drill. Starting from a neutral crossing, the coach either presses left, providing an opportunity for the student to strike around, or the coach lets their sword drift to the right, providing an opportunity for the student to thrust straight on the central line. The student should keep an eye out for the opportunity and immediately perform the proper technique. And if the student performs a technique at the wrong time, Or if their execution of a technique is sloppy, the coach prevents the technique from succeeding. And from very early on in drills like these, we should also introduce movement into the drill. This can be done with both the simple choreographed version, where the student knows exactly which technique they should be doing at all times, and also for the option drill. And starting from a crossing, just like in the simplest version, the coach starts moving around, and the student's job is to maintain the same distance. So now we've gone from a simple static drill to an option drill with movement. And another crucial modifier we can and should add is to make the student more active in creating opportunities to perform the techniques rather than just wait for them to come up passively. And there's a few ways to achieve this, and the first of them is lateral movement. Sudden change in the lateral movement of the student relative to the coach will effectively move the crossing relative to the student, providing an opportunity to perform one of the two techniques. The second way in which the students can provide their own opportunities to perform the techniques is to feint. If the student makes the coach think that a thrust is incoming, the coach parries, at which point the student can strike around. And the most important points here are that the student does not commit too far into the feint, and that the real feint and the real attack are done in one smooth action. Optimally, the real attack arrives while the coach is still parrying the feint. If the feinted attack goes too far, or the real attack is too wide or slow, the coach parries and riposts. So now at this point we can put it all together in an option drill with movement. As the student follows the coach's movement around, the coach may at any time provide an opportunity for either of the techniques. And in addition, the students may try to create their own opportunities for either of the techniques by using feints or sideways movement. And as always, the coach allows well-performed techniques to land while parrying any sloppy attacks and making sure the student prevents the afterball. At this point, we could also try to make the drill competitive while still maintaining the student and coach roles. In this version of the drill, it's fully the student's job to create opportunities for the two techniques and to follow them through properly. Meanwhile, the coach is doing their best to cover themselves in all cases. And finally, we could relinquish the roles, creating a sparring game, where we start from a similar situation as before, but now both are trying to get to perform either of the two techniques. So we no longer have a coach and a student. And both fencers should restrict their first actions to those covered earlier, the strike around, the direct thrust or feint of a thrust and then strike around. But once there's been a committed attempt at either technique by either fencer, they should freely continue the exchange through to the end. And there are, of course, plenty of other ways you could modify the basic drill. You could include a preparatory action with which you come into the crossing. For example, a fendete madrito and a parry with a small step back. Because the prior actions, how you get into the crossing, has a big effect on exactly what sort of crossing you get, and also that way how you should execute the techniques from the crossing and which techniques you are likely to execute. Or you could add more techniques as options to the drill. You could switch the roles so that the student is the one trying to counter these techniques while the coach is performing the thrust or the strike around. Or you could concentrate on different continuations from these techniques. So it's a given that one of these techniques is attempted and then looking at what you can do from there, for example, various grapples and disengages and whatever else. And you can always just spar with your partner with the agreement that you're both trying to focus on these kinds of crossings and these techniques. So you can see how well you manage to apply them in a sparring scenario. The most important thing here is you can train most any fencing technique with a similar drilling framework. You start with a simple choreographed drill, then you introduce options, movement, preparatory actions, continuations, competitiveness, etc. And you can focus on different aspects of the techniques by picking different versions of the drills. And as you run into various difficulties in the more complex drills, you can return to simpler versions to iron out the kinks, and then go back to the more complex drills again to see if the problem's been fixed, and so on.